guys, welcome back to my channel. So this is kind of the conclusion to my September wrap-up. I did my romance books first this month because I felt like it, I don't know, mixing things up, keeping you on your toes. So this is my everything else wrap-up, and I have 8 books to discuss with you guys in this video, and they are all over the board with like genres and age ranges and everything. So I'm just gonna jump into it because I know this is gonna be a long video because I rambled a lot in the romance one, which means I'm in a chatty mood tonight, so let's jump in. As always, I'm going to start with my lowest rated book and work up to my favorite book of the month. That's my ordering range for today's video. The first book that I want to talk about, I feel weird saying this is like my least liked book of the month, but I mean, it was still a solid read. I have Dark Witch by Nora Roberts. This was my very first Nora Roberts book, first of all. I feel like I should say that. This series in particular, the Cousins O'Dwyer series, has been recommended to me like thousands of times just because this checks all of my boxes. It's got horses, it's got Ireland, it's got magic in it, it's got like all of the things that I look for in a book. So this should have been like in the makings of being like one of my favorite books of all time. And I still think it was really great. It was a really fun ride. It just was very simple. And I don't know if this is true for all Nora Roberts books. Maybe this is just like what I should have known going into it. But I feel like her characters are just very simple. I don't want to say one-dimensional characters, but they're very easy to read characters. Like, there's very little to uncover from them. And maybe she just wrote our protagonist that way on purpose. I don't know. But Iona, who is our protagonist, literally says every single thought that comes into her head in a very, like, straightforward way, which got irritating to me after a while, where I was like, girl, keep some of it in the head. Like, we don't need to know all of your thoughts all of the time. But this basically followed Iona, who is kind of a long descendant of the 3 witches in history. I don't know how to describe the backstory of this. Basically, it starts with like a prologue of like these 3 siblings who are all witches who are like fighting this bad dude, and then we zoom forward to present day, and Iona, who is our protagonist, is one of these 3 descendants of these witches and is going to Ireland to reunite with the other 2 to take down some dark force. It sounds very Halloween Town-ish now that I'm saying it, because I'm pretty sure the dark force is very similar to Callahan, who I think was, isn't he the bad guy from Halloween Town? It was Calla something, started with a C, I don't know. But anyway, she ends up going to Ireland, meeting like her distant relatives and finding a life for herself. Like, she works at a stable, falls in love with the dude who works at the stable. Very horse-driven, very Irish, very countryside and historical, with witchcraft thrown in. So here's what I'm thinking. I might continue on with the series reading them physically because I listened to the audiobook of this, and the audiobook was not bad, but it was not great. And I feel like a lot of what I had issues with was the narrator made a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the spells that were in this very dramatic. Like, I mean, it kept you in the mood of the scene, but I feel like it was like over the top dramatic for what was necessary in the scene. Like, I feel like it made it cheesy to me. So I'm gonna try reading the next book to see if it makes a difference or if that's just kind of how it's written. But like, the narrator was like screaming the spells by the end, because yes, it would be like a very climactic moment, so I appreciate that. I'll take that over a monotone narrator, but it was like a little cheesy, so that kind of took me out of the story, so I'm curious to continue on and see what I think physically reading them. So I gave this 3 stars. I still really enjoyed the setting. I liked the characters. They're still in my head, so they were memorable to me. But it was still just a 3-star read for me. The next book I have to talk about was my book club pick that we chose for September, and that was Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. I think almost everybody in this group kind of agreed with me, just from the vibe that I was getting for everybody who was commenting. This is such a trendy series. Like, the 4th and final book just came out, and I'm aware how well loved this series was, so I think I kind of went in with really high expectations, and I probably shouldn't have. Things that I liked in this book were how graphic the, like, surgery and all the gory stuff was, because I'm, like, a medical nerd, so I like reading stuff like that. And I like that Audrey Rose was, like, not afraid to, like, get her hands dirty and get involved in this. But I feel like what I had issues with in this story was what I have issues with a lot of historical setting books that are set, like, in this era or previous, where the sexism is very present. Like, that's just kind of how society was. I'm aware of that. I personally just don't read historical fiction because it gets very irritating to me having women be put in their place constantly, and I understand that's how history works. I'm not saying that, like, I don't like it. I'm just saying, like, it's not my preferred time period to read in. And that was very heavily addressed in this book, and I feel like it was handled really well. Like, she constantly was, like, asserting herself in situations and proving that she was worth being involved in a lot of the things, or being just in the discussion for a lot of the stuff. But I feel like it was over the top. I feel like that was, like, controversial how I said that, but I feel like it was constantly thrown in my face as we were reading it, that, like, Audrey just kept having to, like, reassert herself, and I'm like, I know women were suppressed back then, I get it, and women were, like, not allowed in the sciences, and I get that it's not, like, a woman's place to be in, like, a mortuary situation, but it was just kind of, like, repetitive how often she had to reassert herself, which, again, I know that's how history works, but it just wasn't super fun. I went into this just to enjoy the ride. I actually purposely didn't try and figure it out, even though there was a big, like, mystery. Obviously, we're trying to find out who Jack the Ripper is in the story, and I purposely just, like, wasn't guessing. I was like, I don't know, maybe this dude, but we'll find out. So it was enjoyable. I think I'm going to continue on because everybody said that the series gets better as it goes, so I'm curious to continue on. I like Thomas and Audrey Rose enough to want to see where their story goes next, especially with, like, where this ended, that they're, like, going off now, so I'm curious about that. This book in particular was just very slow moving, and I know that's what everybody has said so far, that, like, the rest of the series picks up its pace. Will I ever reread this? Probably not, so I think I want to continue on with the series while it's still fresh in my head and I don't need to reread it, but ultimately it was still just a 3-star read for me. Alrighty, the next book that I have to discuss is How to Walk Away by Catherine Center. This is an adult contemporary story about a woman who is in a horrible accident and ends up basically in the hospital and paralyzed and is just having to, like, completely start her life over. Basically everything she's worked for and everything that she planned for her life has been put on hold, and she needs to, like, figure out how to walk again. So I gave this book 3 stars. I think that it handled a lot of the medical things, and it handled a lot of her thought processes very well when it comes to being in such a traumatic situation. Like, I think it was very realistically handled how she processed things or how she didn't process things. The things that I didn't really like was there was some weird sexism stuff that was just kind of tossed out there, and it was kind of tossed out as, like, a tongue-in-cheek type of thing where they're addressing how sexist something that she said or feels might have been, but just feeling it anyway. And it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. There were definitely some lines where I was just like, really? I don't think that was completely necessary. And it was 100% like the character saying something about herself and acknowledging that, like, this was a somewhat sexist thing to think about myself, and then just, like, feeling it anyway. Which is a way that you can feel, I understand that, but it was just kind of unnecessary, and it kind of, like, took me out of the story when I was just like, oh, that was uncomfortable to read about. But this basically follows her as she is in, like, rehab and is trying to learn how to walk again, and it's kind of her relationship with herself and processing this new life that she has to deal with, but also her relationship with one of her physical therapists and her family, and how this accident has kind of brought her family together but also torn it apart at the same time. It tackled a lot of things in a very short book, and it handled a lot of them very well. It handled some things a little poorly, it handled some things really, really well. So ultimately I gave this 3 stars. I'm intrigued enough to want to read her other books, and I have her next book to read, and I'm curious about it. I'm very curious about this author from now on, though, so I think probably this coming month I'm gonna read The Things You Leave in a Fire, The Things You Save in a Fire. Don't leave them, you save them. So I think I'm gonna pick up that next book by this author and see where it goes. Moving into my 4-star section of this video, the next book I want to discuss is The Light Between Worlds by Laura E. Weymouth. This story, oh man, this is one of those books. I gave it 4 stars. I feel like it deserves to be a 5-star book, but it was not enjoyable to read, which is something that I personally factor into my rating system. Enjoyment is definitely something that I will consider, but This, in all rights, should be a 5-star book with how beautifully it was written. If you're looking at just purely like writing and storytelling, this is one of the best books I've ever read. But it was hard to get through, so brought my enjoyment level down a tiny bit. So that is a little something about my rating system that I do factor in from time to time. This book, I'm going to describe this as a much heavier and a much more in-depth exploration of the same concept that you see in Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire. So if you guys are a fan of that series, the Wayward Children series, this is a very, very similar story, but it deep dives way more into the aftermath of children that get kicked out of a portal world. Oh man, and it gets dark. So this basically follows sisters who when they were much younger during World War II. So we're in a historic setting in this book. During World War II, during like a bombing, they somehow get transported into a like fantastical world called the Woodlands, and they spend, I think, 3 years there. And one of the sisters is thriving. Like, she is just doing so well in this world, and the other one is kind of constantly trying to find a way back to their world. Like, she always knows that they're supposed to return to where they came from, but they both feel very at home in the Woodlands. And then out of nowhere, they both get kicked back into the real world. So we're dealing with both perspectives of the sisters, and one is like thrilled to be back where she belongs, even though that means they had to leave this like fantastical, awesome world behind. And the other one is not dealing so well. So this book comes with a whole slew of trigger warnings, everything revolving around depression, self-harm, attempted suicide, all of the really heavy, dark things surrounding that part. If any of those things are triggering to you, stay away from this book. But it is handled so beautifully in this story. Like, I can't even express how beautiful the writing was in this. So I gave this 4 stars. In all rights, it should be a 5-star book, but it was just draining, like emotionally draining to read. So I highly recommend this, but definitely go in knowing that it's gonna be a hard one. The next book I finally got to is Spinning Silver, and I actually have the like fancy promotional dust jacket on. Hold on, so that I don't blind you guys, I'm gonna take this off and leave like the regular cover on underneath. There we go. I'm not gonna blind you. I slept on this book for a really long time because I saw how amazing the reviews were, and it was really hyped in my mind. Like, I had really high expectations going into this, and I'm terrified when that happens. Like, when I see the hype about a book and I know I'm gonna like it, I kind of tend to wait on it just to not let that influence my reading. That was like honestly what I did. I was scared to read this. So this is an adult standalone fantasy story that is very loosely based on Rumpelstiltskin, which is another thing that built the hype up, because Rumpelstiltskin is one of the darkest fairy tales that's out there, and I have never read a retelling for it, but I've always wanted to, so again, this built the hype up for this one. So this is loosely following that, but it follows 3 different women from 3 different walks of life and how all of their storylines start to intertwine. And to be honest, I don't know how to describe the story without going like really in depth with everything about the synopsis. But condensed version, it follows 3 different perspectives of 3 different women who are very different characters, have very unique voices. It has touches of Russian folklore, which was really cool. It has really cool fantastical elements in it, like the Stalag race is like this race of intimidating beings who are in this world, so it's definitely set in a fantasy world, but it was very realistically handled, if that makes sense. This book was awesome. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's gonna be one of these books that I want to revisit in the wintertime. Like, it's definitely a very good wintertime reading because it's, again, kind of a Russian-inspired story, so a lot of the folklore is in like snowy scenes. That was the worst description of this book ever. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. I gave it 4 stars. The end. Okay, the next book that I have to discuss with you guys is The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd Jones. This still has the bookmark in it. Let me take it out real quick. This book and me have a hell of a relationship at this point. I read this while I had jury duty for a week, so I feel like me and this book bonded big time over some like not fun memories. This book I loved. I don't know why. I think this was just like the perfect time for me to read a story like this, because this is kind of YA fantasy horror mixed together, and it was like everything that I wanted going into the fall season. This follows Rin, who is a gravedigger. Her father has gone missing in the past, and that's something that she's kind of always on the search for. But she's a gravedigger at a cemetery that is at the base of a mountain that has a lot of lore surrounding it, specifically like fae lore. And this town that she lives in is starting to experience problems with the bone houses. which is a very lovely term for zombies. So the corpses in this graveyard that she works in are starting to come back to life, and she has to take it upon herself to like keep her town safe. Meanwhile, a map maker shows up and they kind of band together to one, solve the issue of the bone houses, because who wants zombies coming into their town? Nobody. And the map maker is this boy who basically was found in the woods when he was a baby, so he's kind of on a journey to find where he came from and his family. So it's their journey as they go kind of off into the mountains to really uncover the lore of what's happening. But basically, I fell in love with this book because the best character in this book is a goat. So we all know that I loved this book. Like, it's a goat that goes on this journey with them, and I'm not going to spoil anything about this goat, but it evolves into something that is great. So if that's at all appealing to you, I'm going to recommend this book so many times over. This is the perfect time of the year to read it because it's kind of spooky, but it's not like scary. Like, there are some like graphic moments, but it's very lighthearted in the writing sense. Like, it's not super eerie and intimidating. Like, there's some like gross scenes, but you're just kind of reading it and you're just like, oh, gross. And that's it. So it's not like scary. It's just so well written. I just really enjoyed this. So I gave this 4 stars, and I probably am going to reread this every year, like around this time. It was so great. I love this book. Okay, while we're on the topic of extremely seasonal books, I also picked up Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell and illustrated by Faith Erin Hicks. This is an adorable little graphic novel that is the quintessential fall book. I discussed this in my recommendations video for Cozy Fall Reads. This is basically following 2 friends who have worked for the past like 4 or 5 years together at a pumpkin patch, but it's not just like a pumpkin patch, it's like a whole fall activity. So it has like a corn maze, it has all of the fall food, it has like a petting zoo, a s'mores pit, it's all of the fall things, and it's basically them going through the entire property and like feeling nostalgic because this is probably the last time that they're going to work together before they go off to college. And it just is so freaking cute. This is like the softest, most precious little fall time story, graphic novel thing. If you're looking for just a really good, feel-good, sit-down fall moment, this is a book I'm going to recommend to you. I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. I've already read it twice. It's so great. Moving in to my top book in this video that I read for the month, I got around to A Heart and a Body in the World by Deb Coletti. This is a book that I have been putting off for so long because I knew that it was going to be a tearjerker for me. I knew that I was going to cry my eyes out reading it, and I need to be like ready for books like that. So this was the time. I finally got around to reading it. I'm going to preface this recommendation summary of this book like a lot of other people have. This is a book that if you're okay with heavy content warnings, if you want to look up the content warnings, head to like Mel to the Annie's Goodreads review about this. Head to a lot of the reviews that have spoilery content warnings, just to be sure if it's something that you can handle. But if you're okay with most triggering things, try to go into this as blind as possible because it is a story that unravels as it goes and you find out more and more as it goes. And it just hits so hard if you're uncovering it as you're reading it. Very spoiler-free synopsis of this. We are following a girl who has had something tragic happen to her. We don't find out about it for a good portion of the book. But she had some tragedy happen and she is just going to run away from her problems and run to see if it can help her heal and move on from this tragic event that has happened to her. And she basically runs across the country and it's her story, and her grandfather is following her in an RV and she becomes more and more famous because she's running for a cause. But it's also just her like emotionally purging everything that's happened to her. So it gets heavy. It gets really heavy. But it was so beautiful and it was so vital. So this book came out in 2018, and without giving any spoilers about the things that happened in this book, I feel like it's even more important in 2019. With the social climate that we are in right now in the US, this is a very vital story to be told, and it's heavy and it covers all of the things that need to be discussed in 2019 in America in a beautiful manner. So that's all I'm going to say about this book. I gave it 5 stars. Look into content warnings if you're worried about it. If not, read this book. It's incredibly important to read in today's day and age, and I'm going to like highly, highly recommend it to you guys. So that is it for my September wrap up. If you guys want to see the romance books that I read in September, check out my part 1. That is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what your favorite book was of September down in the comments. I'm curious. I'm always curious to see what you guys are reading. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in my next one.